Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. We have close to 400 pre-registered attendees from all different time zones, so that type of greeting is appropriate. One other bit of housekeeping note from other WebEx panel discussions in the past, your WebEx client may be treating you like you're literally the only attendee at the meeting. So we just want to let you know that you're not alone. I think we're up past 140 people at the moment, so you are not alone. With that said, let's get into this. I want to do a bare minimum of talking because you'll see we have quite the heavy hitter set of panelists, and they deserve most of the time today. So, in a little bit of, I think the backstory here is many of us here are probably burnt out on online meetings or online events. We've all been stuck from home offices for a long time. So, we're trying to add a little bit more interactivity options to this type of event. So, we're experimenting with Slido.com. You can point a web browser there, a tablet there, or a phone there. And if you use the event code TFT, you'll be able to see some questions. We plan to use this to crowdsource some questions from the audience. So, if you feel like it and you don't want to type your questions into the WebEx chat, feel free to visit Slido.com. Just use event code TFT and you'll pop right into our event. So a little bit more, backstory on why this came to be and, why I'm up here talking to you today virtually. So 10 years ago, I made a very, very bad mistake. There was a new and emerging conference coming up called Bio-IT World, and I submitted a talk abstract loosely called Trends from the Trenches, where I really, I'm in a beneficial position where we do consulting. We're in and out of many, many different interesting organizations throughout the year. And consulting allows us to sort of tell war stories and sort of speak about common trends and pain points. So I started doing that about 10 years ago at this event. And unfortunately, we created a little bit of a monster. The ball kept rolling, the trend stuff kept getting bigger and bigger audiences. And eventually I felt that it was something that I wanted to back away from. And so we've been sort of changing up trends over a while to sort of add in other voices and other speakers. But the reason for this event right now is this is the 10-year anniversary of Trends from the Trenches. And, Bio-IT World was going to do a big thing about it. And fortunately, I'm glad that right now I don't have to worry about that in May. However, because the conference has been postponed, if we can't be together in person, if we can't see our friends and colleagues, together, we can at least come together virtually. So thanks to VAST, thanks to CHI, Bio Team, the panelists, we're able to sort of put this virtual event together as a way of sort of not being able to see and interact with you in person like we would normally do. So again, just to really sort of reiterate here, the way we're going to do the flow of this is I'm going to do an incredibly abbreviated trends talk. I'm trying to go, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then immediately hand it over to Ari to run our panel. You can see here, I'm the least accomplished person on the panel that we've got here. And again, we're just so excited and so honored to have this level of friends and colleagues who are willing to join us for an event like this. So again, same way we thank VAST, the same way we thank CHI. Really, really want to thank all of the panelists who took time from their day-to-day to participate. So the other thing I really want to mention is that Bio-IT World, the conference, was not canceled, it was postponed. So logistics permitting, we still, all of us, all the speakers, all the panelists, all the trend stuff, and the full Trends from the Trenches talk is going to be delivered October 6th through 8th in Boston. So again, we're glad to interact with you virtually, and we really hope to be able to sort of interact with you a little bit more high bandwidth in October. So with that said, let me flip right into the trends bit. Again, because of the nature of this talk, I'm really going to try to go as short as possible. That means I'm going to speak faster than normal and do more slides as usual. So those of you who've seen me speak are probably familiar with this speaking style. As a way of level setting, I really sort of want to talk about the sort of main scientific drivers that are affecting IT in our world. The next couple of slides, I really want to read them and go into deep dives and talk for hours about each of them, but I'm just going to hit them relatively quickly. So really the level setting here is to match the scientific domain to the impact that it has on IT. The first one is fairly straightforward. It's what we've been dealing with for a long time, sequence-based informatics. Generally speaking, you're focusing on storage capacity, CPU rather than GPU-based computing. And if you're doing de novo assembly or other interesting stuff, chances are you have some high memory requirements as well. Moving down, the second item on this table is actually the single biggest change that BioTeam has seen over the last 12 to 24 months. The fastest growing image type, the fastest velocity type of data that we're dealing with is image-based. So it's image-based acquisition, capture, movement, and analysis. The big, the big elephant in the room is cryo-EM, but there's many, many other sources of imaging now in our research labs that we have to deal with. And the interesting thing is this is changing the IT requirements in the bio-IT space. We now actually have to care about both storage capacity and storage performance, because a lot of image-based analysis workflows actually depend on a performant file system, where in the past I could get away with the slow but big file system for sequence-based informatics. When I'm dealing with images and also with ML and AI in the next slide, we actually are starting to see changing requirements where we actually need faster storage instead of bigger storage, or both big and fast storage. And finally, obviously, there's a lot more focus on GPU-based computation when you're dealing with images. Same thing with ML and MI. So machine learning and AI are coming on strong in our world. And the interesting thing about this is also the effect this has on our IT fabric. Particularly when you're doing model and model training, the issue is you're constantly rerunning and reanalyzing your models, which means you need access to all of your old historical data that was used to represent the model. But also your ML and AI workflows are performant based on the speed of the storage system. So again, we're having another driver that's sort of calling for faster storage than traditionally we've deployed in the past. And then finally, I won't speak a lot more about chemistry and MD, except it's a really interesting space. Low data, high CPU requirements. Most of the tooling is running on GPUs. Chemistry and MD are an interesting workload to shift to the cloud simply because of they tend to be CPU heavy and data light. So from a lift and shift aspect, it's actually relatively straightforward to move some chemistry workloads to the cloud where maybe data volumes were preventing you from doing a lot of your sequence-based informatics in a cloud environment. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that it's sort of lucked out that we had VAST as a sponsor for this. VAST has been on kind of our radar since even before they emerged from stealth mode. And since I don't think VAST is going to talk a lot today, and they're definitely going to not talk tech, I want to leave you with a Glenn Lockwood article that was written a year ago when VAST first emerged from stealth mode. It's a really, really interesting sort of behind the scenes take on their technology and what makes VAST sort of a potential disruptor and sort of fairly interesting in this space. So again, this is strictly for the storage nerds, but I really recommend sort of Glenn's third-party dive into sort of what VAST was doing when they came out of stealth mode last year. So finally, it wouldn't be a trends talk if we didn't try to give blunt and honest and cynical advice to our customers. So the section of this slide talk is charitably described, what are vendors going to lie about to you this year? And I don't think anybody is going to be particularly surprised. Whenever you have a product area or a market niche that's overly hyped, you have to watch out for aggressive and overly sort of cynical sales techniques. And absolutely, machine learning and AI are very, very deep in the hype versus reality curve. And so you just have to be a little bit cynical and a little bit careful when you're selecting products or in sort of engaging in your due diligence in this space. The interesting thing, though, is unlike blockchain, machine learning and AI is actually useful and relevant to our industry. And so really, I want to make sure the case that ML and AI are real. They're driving transformative changes in our industry. It's just that if you're not already sophisticated with them or you're early on in your due diligence, you just have to approach the vendor claims, particularly vendors who are slapping the ML and AI label on everything from firewalls to generic software products. It's just an area that's rife with overhype. It's rife with kind of aggressive salespeople. And the other sort of big take-home point here is that the rate of innovation in this space is so rapid that if your organization is not prepared to use these tools, you might actually be better off taking kind of a slow walk because the longer you delay your jump into the ML and AI space, the more of a chance you have to take advantage of the latest innovations in the space. So again, that's just a little bit of blunt advice here about one of the more overhyped areas in our world today. Finally, I've got a couple of minutes left to talk about a brief section of my normal trends talk, and I decided to concentrate on storage and storage-related topics. Number one, because we've got a storage-related sponsor, but also if you look at the bios of our panelists, we've got a lot of heavy hitter, data-heavy data scientists and data architects on the panel. So it makes sense to focus on storage and data management here. The other drivers is that storage and storage-related issues still make up a giant percentage of Bio-Team's consulting. We've solved the capacity problem, but we've still got really gnarly data management, data curation, data governance, and data movement issues. We're also starting to hit the limits of what you can sort of sensibly do on a scale up NAS, particularly when you have emerging workloads, cryo-EM, image-based, machine learning, or AI. So let me just hop quickly into this topic, and then I can sort of stop speaking and hand it over to the panelists. I decided to break up the storage talk into 4 separate topics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how our data is big, talk about how our data is siloed, talk about how our data is dirty, and we'll talk about how our data is biased. And I figure that's a nice way to wrap it up and tie it in with some of the interests and backgrounds of our panelists as well. So big data. I guess I should have mentioned, I apologize for the camp, but all of the graphics for this slide presentation came out of Animal Crossing on the Switch. So if you've never seen Nintendo video game generated graphics in a slide, sorry for the camp. So moving into big data here, this is what I said in the past versus the issues that I'm sort of dealing with now. The problem that we've had right now is that we still see an issue where people are just mindlessly expanding their storage systems rather than making the hard choice to sort of take hold of their data, triage their data, organize their data, wrangle this data. And that was okay. If you didn't have effective scientific leadership and you were okay just throwing money at a problem, you wanted to avoid having difficult conversations with scientists about moving or deleting data, that's fine until now. The capacity limits that are being stretched by image-based workflows, ML, AI, are starting to mean that people who have maybe spent the past couple of years ignoring this problem or throwing money at the capacity problem are starting to see the limits of those effects. And sometimes those limits are fairly negative in terms of impact on an R&D life cycle project. The other thing I've been saying in the past is that for me, the high water mark is at about the 1 petabyte level. You really should have a human being responsible for managing and curating your data. We still are saying that because, again, in May 2020, we've started to see, we still see multiple organizations above the 10 petabyte level who have effectively no governance, no standards, no human-led curator, and in some cases, they actually have no storage quotas at all. That is coming back in a serious way to bite some of our customers and some of our organizations. And then the final point here now is when you've got billions of files or potentially trillions of files under management, even if you have a human data wrangler or a data curator, she's still going to need advanced analytics and advanced sort of metadata aware storage profiling and analytic tools if she's going to perform her role. So huge need here on data curation and data management. The other thing I've been saying in the past is, data triage is required. We're generating or acquiring data faster than we can effectively store it for a full life cycle. I've always talked about sort of triage and deleting raw data, particularly if it's cheaper to go back and redo the biology than keep the data around in digital form. Bluntly speaking, I think we've kind of failed at data management, and I'm starting to be a little bit sterner and a little bit sort of harsher in my communication methods. In particular, I'm starting to change my messaging and the way that I talk to customers and the way that I do consulting. The first trend I'm trying to promote is actually a culture change. I really want to stress the concept that storage, particularly scientific data storage, is treated as a consumable laboratory resource. When you talk to investigators and you talk to scientists, they're very comfortable with tracking, justifying, budgeting for, and planning for how they use expensive consumable items within their lab. And let's be blunt, storage is an expensive consumable. And I think it's beyond time that we need to sort of manage it as such. So active partnership with IT and scientists need to be prepared to justify and actively manage this data. The days of unlimited quota and unlimited storage for a scientist just because they asked are sort of over. That's not tenable. It's not affordable. We can't, operationalize that effectively. So I'm really trying to sort of pitch this. Storage is a consumable. We need to manage it as such. And then the second point, number 2 on that slide, is something that I wanted to steal for a while. It's actually a trend that's coming out of the big DoD supercomputing sites in the United States, where as they deploy, as we're entering the exascale era, and as they start to deploy multi-petabyte, massive storage systems, they are not giving personal storage anymore. I'm going to show you in the next slide here. The NERSC quota limit on home is 40 gigabytes and 1 million inodes. The trend that I'm trying to promote here in enterprise, pharmaceutical, biotech, and research is no more giant home folders, no more data silos owned by a PI who keeps 10 years worth of data, in his home directory and then leaves, and someone has to come in and articulate the mess. Moving forward, what I really want to stress is scientific data storage is allocated on a project or a group basis. It's no longer handed out to an individual or a PI. We've sort of proven that we can't sensibly behave in that world. And this is just a screenshot. I stole this from the NERSC website the other day ago. And again, you can see here as they've got many different file systems. They're all quoted in different ways. But the coolest thing and the idea that I want to promote is your home directory is quoted at 40 gigs. You need more than that. You got to go to a project or a group share. I think that's a fantastic idea and a best practice that I really sort of want to encourage more broadly. Talking briefly a little bit about how our data gets siloed here. We've seen a lot of stuff. The size and breadth and complexity of data-rich environments is increasing. That's both in the wet lab as instruments are getting faster and bigger, but it's also because we're adding more sensors, more data sources, and also, with COVID-19 and everything else, we're doing more and more collaborative research. So simply speaking, the number of endpoints is increasing rapidly as well. So what we're starting to see here, the problems that siloed data is starting to cause is if your network is not up to snuff, if you haven't started thinking about science DMZs and separating data traffic from business traffic on your network, we're starting to see situations where data can get stranded at the edge. One bit of good news is we are starting to see, this was a little bit buzzwordy last year where they're talking about, compute at the edge, but we're starting to actually see that happen. The simplest example here is when you do a brief QC test on data that comes off of an instrument. You do a local analysis of the data after you've acquired it. Only if it passes the QC test do you take that additional step of moving the data into your core for analysis and sort of full lifecycle treatment. So there's a lot more interesting sort of compute and transformation happening now at the edge. Moving on to sort of the data management and the buzzwordy trends here. Data lakes. We're still building them. They're real, they're effective, they're really, really useful, but there's still a lot of failures out there. And we could speak at length for why a data lake project fails. That's a really interesting topic in and of itself. And then finally, data commons, and there'll be a lot of people on the panel who are very, very familiar with data commons. And I just really wanted to throw out that BioTeam really likes the Gen 3 platform from CTDS. And so there's a couple of URLs there if you're interested in what an open source Gen 3 based data commons looks like. And then finally, can't mention COVID-19 and some of the work that BioTeam's been volunteering with behind the scenes is we've been helping out with both the data organization and also the source code for Gen 3 at a COVID-19 specific data commons hosted by the Chicago folks. And the URL for that is down at the bottom if you want to go check it out. So the next topic here is dirty data. And the real issue here is that, I've seen this myself in my career at my particular age. I entered the industry when when we were sort of dealing with data on paper and handwritten laboratory notebooks. And in one career generation, we've moved to sort of petascale data wrangling. And generally speaking, I think we've scaled capacity. We've not missed data. We've managed to store all of the data that we've generated, but we've really dropped the ball on literally everything else: governance, curation, metadata, SOPs. And honestly, IT can't do this for you. IT can't do this. I solidly place the blame for this issue on scientists and honestly scientific leadership who are oddly enough fearful of having difficult conversations with their scientists or unwilling to budget or unwilling to resource for capabilities that they actually are going to need. And so this is really, really going to bite us, particularly as we move into the ML and AI world, where the cleanliness and cataloging and curation and tagging of our data is really essential if you want to get accurate results to come out of your ML and your AI workloads. Finally, the other thing I really want to talk about is bias data. There are tremendous war stories here about bad inputs or biased inputs generating bad models, which then produce bad output, which then lead to bad outcomes. So it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility in the bio-IT space. It's our responsibility as scientists to sort of understand the risks of biased data, unconscious, explicit. We have to understand the issues that we really need to get clean data from diverse and equitable sources if we're going to have any hope of having both accurate results coming out of these models as well as good outcomes for all coming out of this. And this is one of my last slides because I really feel that this is kind of a strong area of our panelists, and potentially they might have a lot to say about this. This is generally one of my fears about the ML and AI era, that our history of bad data curation and bad data hygiene is going to combine with the problems in ML caused by bias or bad data, and we're going to get some really weird or some really negative outcomes from this, over the next couple of years. One final thing I wanted to do is from Slido, we've been soliciting some questions. So I did get a question here that I wanted to pre-stage and answer. And I will have to disappoint the audience. I'm not going to be able to answer the murder hornet question because that's the focus of my thesis at YouTube University. And I plan to drop a hot preprint at Bio-IT World in October. So I'm just going to tackle the first question up here. So I really want to talk about stuff that I've got wrong. So this is kind of some of the things that I've been repeating myself at previous trends talks that I think I was actually wrong about. So number one, compilers matter again. We saw a lot of real interesting data showing that commercial compilers were delivering significantly better performance than some of the open source tooling. I thought that would turn into a lot more work building scientific tools against different compilers last year. Totally wrong. I haven't played with compilers, I think, in about 18 months at this point. Second thing I thought it would be accurate is that for the first time in a while, Intel has some serious competition. AMD has serious CPUs and a really interesting roadmap. I thought a lot of my 2019 HPC work would be focused on benchmarking, helping companies make an AMD versus Intel procurement decision. I think that was a little ahead of the times. We tend to be a little bit conservative with CPU platforms, but given what we've seen with the exascale supercomputing awards, I sort of expected to spend a lot more time benchmarking in 2019-20, and haven't seen it. Never really sort of materialized in our enterprise product portfolio. Finally, I talked a lot about this in the past about the magic of automatic auto-tiering storage. And it turns out I've seen this in the real world. It's actually not great for scientists. The issue we have here is that the sort of magical tiering of storage is usually predicated on things that don't map well to the way that we do science. So I don't want to have something move to a different tier or move to an archive based on a generic policy like the last time someone touched this file or the age at which this file was created. That works great for corporate workloads, but it's really bad for science. we don't tend to work on a file age or last access time. We tend to work on a project or a team basis. So I'm modifying my messaging around here and really saying what I really would like to see is user self-service. I think scientists need to be able to make archive and tiering decisions. A help desk ticket is okay, but if it requires hours of effort from an IT person, that's less than adequate. Self-service would be the goal. But in particular, I want to move from policy-driven tiering to allowing researchers to make tiering and movement decisions based on a project or group. And to do it either based on a path or a tag is the ideal way that I would like to see this sort of industry move. And finally, I talked a lot about how awesome a single global storage namespace was, because if you give scientists multiple namespaces, they store things in 6 different locations and it gets messy. But scientific leadership, I think we've had a lot of failure here that we have not adopted well to giant storage namespaces. We use them badly, we use them inefficiently, and things are just as messy in a giant namespace as they were in a separate namespace. Related to that, I'm really getting tired of scientists who've built entire careers as data scientists or entire publication track records on data intensive science who actively avoid trying to manage data or whine to IT or expect IT to do all of their jobs for them. I'm being blunt here. If your job is predicated on data intensive science, you need to do your job. You need to actively take responsibility for your data. And in many cases, that involves doing things that it's not really appropriate for IT to be doing, like making archive and tiering decisions based on that. And like I said, the last bit of this is, like I said, that we need to treat storage as a shared responsibility model between IT and science. I had a great colleague, Fernanda, mention that she hasn't really seen this experience in her world. She's had a lot of experiences where there's been a great, fantastic communication pattern between IT and researchers. And I actually can say that I've seen the same thing. Scientists are not malevolent. They're not stupid. They're not trying to mess with IT. It's just that sometimes when you sit down with a scientist, their mental model of a cost of 10 terabytes is based on the fact that 10 terabytes costs $70 at Costco to buy. And so as long as your IT department is resourced and engaged to have true back and forth communication with the scientists, this stuff works out. However, in environments where that communication is not in place, we really have issues. And like I said, the era of scientists demanding free, unlimited storage delivered to them on a platter from IT is over. If you are involved in high velocity, large data, if your career is predicated on data intensive science, you need to step up. You need to either take ownership for this, or you need to actively collaborate with IT and sort of manage your consumable resource in sort of a joint manner. So again, that's me complaining as an IT person. It's probably an appropriate way to sort of end my little trends talk here. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you. I'm not even going to read my acknowledgments. I'm just going to pass it over, I think, to Jeff from VAST. And Jeff is going to have a few words, and he's going to toss it over to Ari, and then the smart people can take over.
Thanks, Chris. That was a world record in terms of words per minute, I think. Yeah, so, I'm just here to kind of quickly introduce VAST for those of you that don't know us. We did start selling the product in the end of 2018. And our general claim to fame is that unlike a lot of the other storage companies in the market that are really focused on making flash infrastructure faster and faster at times at any cost, VAST's real kind of distinction is that we believe that we've figured out a unique way to bring the cost of infrastructure, all flash infrastructure, down to a point where it can be cost competitive with that of hard drive or hybrid storage infrastructure. And so the objective is ultimately, for example, for our life sciences customers to reduce the amount of variables that scientists have to deal with, and to make storage much simpler to deploy and provision by the IT organizations that are deploying our product, by essentially building a system that's large enough to store all of your data, fast enough such that you don't have to buy any additional faster storage on top of it, and affordable enough such that the arguments towards archiving and tiering tend to go away. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is to be an extinction level event to the hard drive and the various tiering considerations that come along from buying different classes of storage when you don't have to decide anymore. We've been very fortunate to receive a lot of interest in the life sciences community. We call customers like Ginkgo Bioworks and the NIH and Zebra Medical customers today, happy customers. And what we think is we're basically future-proofing infrastructure from the changes in the application sets that will kind of wash across the life sciences community, particularly as organizations start to wrestle with things like new artificial intelligence codes across both genomic and image data. And so we're happy and humbled to be part of today's event. We are kind of a hot company in the space where we just received $100 million of additional funding at $1 billion valuation. And one of the things that we're trying to do with our success is to kind of pay it forward in the life sciences community. And we have been shipping systems to organizations that are doing very impactful work on COVID at no cost, just to help them out of a jam as they find that their scientific workload goes up precipitously. So if you find that you're really stuck and you need help, please reach out to us at hello@vastdata.com. We can't do the science, but we can at least help the people that are enabling the advances here. So with that, thanks for everyone joining, and happy to be part of the whole session. I'm going to turn it over to Ari, and he'll take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff, so much. Thank you, Chris, for yet another word canon, and also a really great overview of the state of technology and life sciences. So thank you, everyone, for joining on this Tuesday. And also just a last thank you to Bio-IT World and Cambridge Health Tech Institute for putting on this event. And just for everyone's knowledge, there are still 217 people here. Thank you all for staying. I really think this panel is going to be really fun, and I'm super excited to get it started. Let's roll into it a little bit. We're really excited to have an extremely relevant and informative conversation about really the first thing on everyone's mind these days, which is the coronavirus pandemic that's totally changed all of our lives. As you can see up on the slide here, our panelists really are experts across a huge range of scientific disciplines with tons of expertise from everything from lots of computing infrastructure, things like high-speed networks, HPC, cloud, to data science, data governance, data sharing, modeling, etc., to artificial intelligence and machine learning, deep learning applications in biomedicine, and up to and including national data strategies. So I'm really excited and honored to moderate this panel today. And I really thank the panelists and especially the attendees for taking the time to stick around for this. Just a quick note again, please, if you have questions, please use Slido. It is being moderated. I have it up on my screen, and Adam Kraut is here to help alert me to questions that are popping up. So we will do that. And also, we're going to get some time. Some of you asked a couple of questions for Chris. He's part of the panel, so we're going to get into those after we jump in. So with that, I'll do a quick round of introductions for folks, just in order that we see them here. Jeff already introduced himself, and Chris already did as well. Susan Gregoric, who's the Associate Director of Data Science and the Director of the Office of Data Science and Strategy at the National Institutes of Health is here. We're very happy to have her here. She's right smack in the middle of all the NIH COVID-19 stuff, as I'm sure she'll tell you, and all of the data strategies at NIH, which is really exciting. Matthew Trinnell, old friend of Bio Team, and I'm very excited that he's here. Former Vice President and Chief Data Officer at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Institute, before that at the Broad Institute. Right now refers to himself as Data Commoner at Large, and very involved in a whole lot of the COVID-19 data aspects, and has spent a lot of time on data access and data commons. Vivian Benazzi, also an old friend and one of the premier folks in the data commons, data ecosystem space, formerly of the National Institutes of Health, currently Chief Biomedical Data Scientist at Deloitte. Very excited to have her here. Eli Dart, sorry, everyone's an old friend, so I'm going to keep saying it. Eli Dart has been a friend for a long time, network engineer and a part of the science engagement group at the Energy Sciences Network at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, DOE. One of the premier folks who came up with the idea for Science DMZs to begin with, and someone who really is a big proponent of networking architectures to promote scientific collaboration. And not last and certainly not least, Hanna Faraday, who is a new member of BioTeam, a senior scientific consultant for AI and HPC, and was formerly at NVIDIA for a few years, and before that at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So she has a fantastic perspective on all of this, and we're really excited to get started. So thank you all for being here. Let's all jump in. So We're going to start high level. So as you may or may not have seen, our goal today, our primary goal today, is to really focus on COVID-19. We want to really talk about how COVID-19 is impacted biomedical research and scientific computing, you really to talk about the places where it's broken down barriers to find solutions through data, but also what problems in society have been highlighted in this space as a result. So I'm going to start quickly, first off with Susan and Matthew. So we're going to start pretty high level here. We're all doing this panel virtually because of COVID-19. We much rather would have done this in person. Everyone on this panel is deeply involved in responding to the crisis in one way or another. So Susan, you've been deeply involved in the initiatives of the National Institutes of Health. What do you see as the greatest challenge we're facing in data analytics and infrastructure that's limiting our ability to solve this problem?
Thanks, Ari, and thank you, by the way, for inviting me to this exciting panel today. It's a pleasure to be on the panel from my home here in Maryland. NIH, like other agencies, has a fairly long history of supporting data science and supporting software and platforms for analytics and leveraging infrastructures like the cloud. But many of our efforts in the past have focused on a specific disease like cancer or a specific data type like genomics. And now we find ourselves literally working against the clock to fight COVID-19, and it's literally like a hydra. We at NIH and in the community now need to bring together all of our capabilities in data standards and in data interoperability, and to leverage not only our current infrastructure, but those of other agencies like the DOE and NSF and private industry in order to understand COVID-19 and to develop real therapies and vaccines and treatments, not just right now for the immediate quarantine that we find ourselves in, but also for the really long-term health effects that will be a result of COVID-19 infections. So I think my one message is, we had the luxury of working on data standards, data interoperability, computing infrastructures in the past, and now we actually need to really work fast and hard and together if we actually want to solve this disease. Thanks.
That was really interesting. Matthew, really same question. Currently you're acting director of the Pandemic Response Commons Consortium, which we're working together on. So from that perspective, what do you think our greatest challenges are in understanding this process and mounting a defense against it?
Yeah, sure, thanks. And thank you for having me on the panel. I'd like to echo Susan's sentiments. This is an impressive body of people here. I think the real challenge to understanding the virus is simply that biology is hard. And this is something that, I think we tend to underestimate sometimes. And it's only when we bring this intense time pressure to it that we see, wow, this is really difficult. And we need to be doing much more active information sharing than the typical biomedical cycle, which involves publication, research publication. So if you just look at the brief history of virus, where it started out very much as an acute respiratory, all the focus was on its acute respiratory effects. It was only the beginning of April with a publication out of New Orleans that the cardiovascular implications started to be seen. You see, everyone is seeing a small piece of this. And the variation from hospital to hospital in terms of how this is manifesting and what the different demographics and course of the disease trajectory are, it really is a time when the only way we're going to be able to do this quickly is to figure out how to share information more quickly. We're doing that, starting to do that in a pretty ad hoc way, and it's working up to a point. I'm really concerned about mounting a sustainable defense against this. We really need to put something more robust into place that will take us into the next phase of this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think we have a lot of leanings to this architecture. I think to the point of both Susan and Matthew, where we've started a community effort to start to coalesce a little bit on the idea of platforms, the ideas of of starting to use, common data elements, et cetera, to pull things together. But as a community, we're pretty far from there. The rest of the panel, Vivian, I think I'm going to pick on you because this is a lot of your space. But what is your take?
So I think this leads into a broader question. But first, thanks again also, Ari. Really appreciate the time this morning, and morning to everybody who's on the call here. So I think the space is really interesting. I want to pick up on what Susan and what Matthew were saying. I think there's a real focus now and before on the need for data sharing and for collaboration. That is, we've got to break down the barriers quickly, because to solve this, we have to work together. I think, as Matthew was saying, in the past, there have been reasons for that not to happen. It's got to do with funding cycles. It's got to do with the way people approach it. It's been more individualistic for many reasons. If we want to survive this collectively, we have to work together. So I don't think we can no longer be islands of knowledge. I think we have to be a world of knowledge. And I think we need unified approaches to do that. So the pieces that were there in the past had to do with, as I mentioned, things like funding cycles, people's opportunistic interests and abilities to produce certain systems or platforms. I think what's changing now, and I've seen examples, we all know that data sharing is important, but we also need things around that. So we need things like common language to exchange and understand the data. Everyone tends to build their own, but if we're really going to start talking to each other, we need to have that. And that's where those data standards and best practices come in. And I think there are many efforts that are already underway in this area, and they're now starting to really explode. So I'll give you two. One I'm working with directly. One is the Research Data Alliance, the RDA, the other one is GA4GH, the Global Alliance for Global Health. Both of those are working on COVID-19 approaches to standards and best practices. And to give an example of this, at least I'm more familiar with some of the work with RDA, normally it takes a long period of time for standards to come out. Yet in 6 weeks, they're putting out a sprint. They're into their third version this Friday of the first attempt to not reinvent the wheel and just try and bring communities across the world together to have a better understanding of what is there in a number of areas associated with data standards and best practices. That's just unheard of. So the pressure we're getting to do that is high, and we're seeing examples of how people are starting to work together. This also applies to common data elements. I think they're under similar discussions. There's also tools for, we've talked about data harmonization. Now there's a sprint for it. So groups are talking about how do we get to that quickly and how do we work together. There are some standards out there. There's some technologies I've certainly seen from some vendors that are actually trying to cross those, not trying to reinvent a new one, but essentially to cross bridges between those. I think another thing that's happening greatly is, I think Chris was talking about this, about data cleanliness and interoperability. We need to pay attention to this. We don't want to just get to the endpoint. We have to pay attention to the data and its structures underneath, and that touches the data governance methods. What are we doing to manage our data? Because that's going to be the pieces that allows us to work and interoperate. And the last piece I'll raise here to pass it back to you, Ari, is we need to, and we are thinking about this, about data privacy and security and responsible data sharing. There is a strong need to do this, and for lots of different reasons, as the community has been aware of this. We are paying attention for data security and privacy, but it also slows you down in the ability to do something. So to balance those two things out is really important. People need to understand that a balance is needed, and I think we're starting to pay attention to that. So something that's really starting to come to the fore is the identity management systems, the authorization authentication methods that are needed. They've been this kind of in the back, but now people are becoming more aware of it. So those are just some pieces that there's more, and I'll throw it back to you, Ari. I'm sure we can have an open discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that, Vivian. And just let me mention to attendees, there's some great questions coming in over Slido. We'll address them in just a few minutes, so keep them coming. Anyone else on the panel have a response to this right now? I'm seeing shaking heads. So that's fine. So let's move on. We went high, so now let's dive in deep a little bit and talk about infrastructure. We've really seen, as was mentioned a little bit by the panelists so far, we've seen unprecedented levels of data sharing and huge data production globally, and honestly, a level of collaboration I don't think we've ever seen before. But it's really as a result of the pandemic taking hold So that means that there's a whole lot of data flying around the world, and the storage and computational capacity needed to make sense of it is pretty astounding if you really think about it. So following on that last discussion point, Eli, what infrastructure challenges and successes have you seen so far, specifically with global data sharing? And also, what wins have we seen so far?
So I think there's a couple of things here. First, I'd like to echo the others and thank you for being included in this. It's pretty cool to be here with this group of people. So thank you. So I think there are several wins that we've seen in building large scale infrastructure for data sharing and data movement and so forth. And I mean, really, I always try to think of sort of a first principles derivation of this, right? What we really need is for the data to be wherever it's productive for the data to be. And that's driven by what the scientist needs in order to extract knowledge from that data. And if the data is not already where it needs to be, then I need a mechanism to put it where it needs to be, right? And so there's this whole thing of, well, you move to the compute to the data if you can, right? Of course we do that. In some cases we can't. And so now we need an effective, right, a human space effective as well as tech space effective data placement mechanism, right? So there's a, I don't want to sort of just be Mr. Science DMZ over here, right? But there's a set of architectural models that allow us to do that in a way that's sort of consistently performant. And what we've seen is that the workflows that take advantage of those structures, the scientists worry about the things that they would prefer to be worrying about, right? How is my code structured? How does my code perform? What knowledge am I extracting from it? Right? As soon as the data orchestration piece stops working, they're now no longer focused on the productive bits. And now they're like wrangling, how do I get my 20 terabyte data set over to where it needs to be, right? And that is just like not a good use of scientists' time, especially now when, as several folks have already pointed out, right, time is of the essence. And so the big take home for me, right, is that we're sort of partway through this transition where we're getting some of the tech debt out of data management and data placement. We have a long way to go, but the folks who have done that are seeing huge benefits from it. And if your workflow was already 100% network-based and all you're doing is orchestrating data movement, data placement, data analysis between large-scale infrastructure systems, you can go home and be socially distanced, right, and continue your work. If your work requires you physically carrying around USB hard drives, suddenly you're stopped, right? And so there's a really key piece here, right, which is let's put all the tech in the tech bucket, right, and have the humans orchestrating that in a way that's productive, rather than having them in the middle of sort of have their hands physically on the data workflow. That just doesn't scale.
Yeah, this is something you and I have talked about extensively, which is essentially, the infrastructure needed to do modern research, which essentially can be considered as a research tool today, as much as a microscope or a plate reader or any of the or a sequencer. That architecture really, for the benefit of the scientists, should be abstracted away. They shouldn't have to worry about how it works, where to store it, and that involves sort of middleware and platforms. But the infrastructure still has to be there. And so, Chris, what about Hpc and Cloud? I mean, what have you seen the main barriers to success here? Have things like AWS credits and the COVID-19 Hpc consortium helped? Have they formed a new thing that people have to figure out how to use?
Yeah, I think so the issue that we have here is, again, I think it was alluded to earlier in the panel, is that it's so tempting just to rapidly throw technology at a problem and not throw smart scientists at a problem. So in many cases, we've seen, I mean, it's good to see every exascale, every supercomputing site offering up, even Beamline, facilities are prioritizing their scheduling now to offer up, people who want to study COVID structures and things like that. So I think for me, really, the cloud has been a winner. The thing that kills me still are the nuances like egress fees and things like that. So you still have to think a lot about where you are going to place your data and where you are going to commute on the cloud. some of the winning tools and where I'd like to see, again, I think Eli popped this into my head, is if this situation that we're in now, it causes the death of physical slopping around of USB drives, that'll be a great outcome for science. If we start, sort of defaulting to the network is the transport mechanism for data, that's great. And in particular, like I said, it makes me sad as an IT person when I see a scientist spending hours or days of her time simply moving data or tying up her corporate laptop, doing a big data copy. So for me, the winners are low-hanging fruit. It's like Globus. With Globus Connect, I can deliver to an S3 bucket. I can deliver to an on-prem storage system. I could drop it onto a data transfer node at one of my collaborators. So I'm really sort of looking forward to empowering scientists with the tools that they need to move the data, putting the spike in the coffin of physical data movement and physical data management. There's so many untalked about risks when you're moving data around on hard drives that it really is a practice that we should be spiking as soon as possible. And obviously, the really nice thing about the cloud is the agility at which we can throw together multi-party collaborations. It would be far harder for me to open up my Active Directory, punch holes in my firewalls, and open up my VPN. And I think, honestly, it's really the combination of the supercomputing sites, the beamline facilities are reprioritizing for the sort of COVID fight. The credits are working great. I think the risk there is, again, there's too many smart people who think throwing technology at is going to solve the problem. We have to focus on the scientists and the biologists to actually solve the problem for real. But honestly, I think the tools and the engineering it's all there. I think maybe this might be the kick in the pants that we need to sort of push them further and deeper into our research orgs.
Yeah, awesome point. Obviously, I agree 100%. Anyone else on the panel have anything to add there? And then we'll grab some people.
I'd like to just echo this. I shared this with you last night, Ari, that I have this concern right now, specifically in COVID, that we have this tendency towards tech solutionism, where there are a lot of really hard problems to be dealt with right now, and they range from governance to organizational to all sorts of things. We tend really to gravitate towards technical solutions first. And I'm seeing this at every level. I sit on this National Research Tech Task Force, which is just focused on leveraging efforts like Google, Apple's contact tracing as a sort of silver bullet when the issues that are really I think blocking so much of what we need to do are non-technical. So I just want to really echo that point.
Yeah, totally agree. I've seen this in organizational management too. It's the same problem. Those who understand tech want to get tech to solve the problem, but you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, right? You need people, processes, and technology. You can replace processes with science and methodology to actually use the technology well and make sure the technology is working for the problem you need to solve, rather than having technology finding a problem to solve. Right? It's kind of the opposite direction. And right now we have to be focused and efficient. So, anyone else have something to add? Vivian, if you're talking, you have to unmute.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was gonna mention that. I think we need to focus on the mission. What is it the science we're trying to do? I think I echo that in what Matthew was saying. And I think the other one is the cultural barriers we have to break down. The technology can often be the easiest part. It's getting everyone to understand, to be on the same page, realizing that pulling together is important for a particular set of reasons. It's the cultural issues within organizations of having to break those down. I think I saw some questions here from our folks who are online with us. Like, how do we really make a difference? What's the tipping point? I think we collectively have to make that tipping point. All of us that work it, we don't have a cohesive end-to-end system. We're all working in different parts with just the people on this panel. But I think if we move towards a much more cohesive approach, now is the time to drive to that. A lot of us have known that. Now we can do that. I think the permission is there, the time is there, and the urgency is there. And I think if those of us who are on this panel and others can help drive towards that, I think we can start breaking down some of those barriers that we just discussed.
Yeah, excellent point. I think focusing on the science to be done is a new idea community-wide, right? Since now science is suddenly in everybody's face every day with some level of interpretation. I think focusing on the problems that need to be solved and then figuring out how to solve them combining a lot of expertise like the folks on this panel is a great place to go. Any other input from the panel? So I'm gonna pause for a second, and then we're gonna dive sort of into the data science stuff. There's a lot of really great questions coming in on Slido and some other places. Want to talk through some of those. So this is open to the whole panel. The three most upvoted ones I'm going to go through first. So first one is, what is the difference between what science can and cannot be done in the cloud now and in the near future, and what's driving that change? Who wants to tackle that one?
I guess I can start. I know we've seen a lot of really great work in analytics platforms on the cloud. You mentioned Gen 3, and that's a perfect example. And I think where the cloud, at least from where I sit, has its most strengths tends to be in the sort of the data analytics in the large memory space, and where it struggles is more in the molecular protein dynamics and sort of the equations of motion. And there's great value in bringing both those high-performance computing and cloud analytics together to solve really hard problems that do require those sort of dynamic trajectories with machine learning and parameter optimization, and particularly for COVID-19. So I think that in the future, what we'll probably see is much more heterogeneous architecture with more programs that do bursting down or up into the cloud or down into HPCs. And that's really going to be a great game changer for biomedical research, because our problems span many different temporal and spatial dynamics, and allowing for that type of high performance computing with large data analytics will really be a game changer.
Yeah, Susan, I think that's a great answer. There's so much that we can utilize in that space because it's so widely available. The problem is to use it for what it is, and not what everyone hopes it is. Chris, I know you have some things to say about this. When to use the cloud, when not to use the cloud. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, I don't really want to pontificate here. I think there are cost drivers, compliance drivers, and collaboration drivers. Typically, that would help you make the decision, pro or con. And just to end the comment, we're still building and deploying on-premise infrastructure as well. So it's very much a dynamic process. You have to choose based on your requirements, and you're basically it's all science and requirements driven at this point. And it's a hybrid cloud future, or it's a on-prem and cloud but separate type future.
Yeah, agree 100%. Again, there's that drive it by the science. If you're going to use the cloud, make sure it's for a capability. Chris, I'm going to echo something you say almost every year. Don't go to the cloud because you're trying to save money. You're not going to. Go to the cloud.
It's a capability thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Okay, so following on the cloud environments question, one more question from the audience. Cloud environments can be remarkably complex and intimidating. What layered solutions, open source or commercial, have you encountered that simplify and speed the process of building and managing analytical pipelines and viz tools in the cloud? Anyone want to take that? Everyone's sitting there smiling. Vivian, you have to unmute. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, perfect. I'll have a stab at that. So they are incredibly complex, and I think what's happening is it's also complex. So I think a lot of people, to reduce that complexity, are providing what are called data platforms, and we're seeing a plethora of those everywhere, which is fantastic because it means you can interact and play with the data without looking at the underlying hardware, etc. It reduces some of that layer complexity. That's fantastic. It also creates a level of fragmentation because those systems often don't interoperate. They're built with their own bespoke systems for whatever those reasons. It's not malicious in any way. I think it's people trying to get to an end result, which is fantastic. But I think what we're also discovering is there's a discussion, just as there are for data standards, there's also a discussion around reusable services that exist on the cloud. So certainly Google has been going in this direction, but AWS and the other cloud providers, I'll put them all in the same bucket with respect, are starting to realize that apart from just being the ability to store, they have a collection of services which enable you to load, extract, do what you need with data, and also layers of analytics. And those are becoming more and more available to folks. And also how you put those together in terms of the Lego blocks is potentially a little easier. It's not perfect, But the advantage of doing that means that you have reusable services, that as we build out more platforms, they're using similar services, which by definition should result in some level of better interoperability. So I don't think it's perfect yet, but it may be, again, because we've had a call to arms here, so to speak, that maybe this is the time to be thinking about this even more strongly. What you don't want is 5 different platforms all working with COVID data, maybe even the same data, can't talk to each other because they have different forms of analytics, but they're actually equally valuable. Because the amount of time that it would take you to pull out that data, redo it in another system simply because it didn't work right at the same time for a different data set is problematic. So I think as much as we focus on the data cleanliness and organization and structure, we also have to think about the implications on the cloud. And I think we're also going to have to live in a perfect world where we have both. And so as long as we pay attention to it and move that forward, as well as trying to answer questions, which is going to be a complex balance, I think that's important to consider.
Thanks, Vivian. That's excellent point. And I think I'll say something that I say to a lot of our clients too, which is that yes, these cloud environments are incredibly complex. You know, I think Amazon's up to 28,000 different services or something. I'm joking. I don't know what it actually is, but it's a lot. You know, and I tell some people, look, who really don't understand what the cloud is, rightfully so. It's very complex. Essentially, you can't use the cloud as it is to gain any functionality, right? Essentially, what you're given is someone else's weird data center that you have to operate through APIs, and they charge you for weird little things, and you're not sure what services to use. So the environment is very complex. So much like we were talking about before, a lot of that needs to be abstracted away for most of scientists to be able to use it. They need to really be able to focus down on the research that need to be done and not worry about the back end. So that's my closing of that one. So great question. All right, so let's really aim towards the middle of the 2 previous issues we talked about, which were sort of a high level, what are the challenges, and low level, what's the technology. Let's talk about data, because that's really what we're all talking about. Life sciences and biomedical research have been sort of plagued with a lack of unified standards and data formats, common data elements, linking high-level scientific metadata so you can compare different data sets, general availability due to policies, data protection, security, bad planning, and in the end, on some level, greed and motivation. So some data are, deliberately siloed. So I'll start with Vivian. What's your impression of how the COVID-19 outbreak has affected that landscape versus how it was before 2020?
Yeah, so I think this problem has been, for anybody that's been in the AI practicing realm, has been that sort of, we can see the possibilities, we could see what it could do. We're itching and dying to get this framework essentially of data sharing and data utilization ready so that the promise of AI can really come true, which is, this is the problem exactly that AI is good for, where you have, multi variables, right? So many variables that are contributing to a problem. And the only answer you really want to know is, this person going to be okay, or is this person going to need another kind of treatment? There are lots of drugs being tried. There's lots of outcomes. There are lots of treatments being tried. But we can't apply any of it because we don't have data coming out of instruments. We don't have data coming out of the outcomes. We have privacy issues, right? We have national border issues. We have data sharing issues. And so all of these bits that we're building right now, like federated learning, for example, where you could, in theory, you could ameliorate or not have to deal with these issues of border and information security and do the training on site. You still have those issues of trying to get to the data that is coming off an instrument, is coming off a ventilator, or the data that the doctor is writing down on a piece of paper, or even putting it into a health record, a patient health record. Until we have these things in place, until we have these systems in place, that goes beyond the network, it goes beyond the storage, then we'll be able to kind of realize the promise of AI. And until we can do that, we can't. So right now, the best we can do really is kind of try to tackle AI, or try to throw AI problems that we've done previously that take too much time. For example, molecular dynamics. Like, can I get this drug to dock into a protein that we know exists within this virus or within the host to prevent the virus from replicating or doing some other function that then causes the disease. And molecular dynamics takes a long time, right? You have to know what the protein is. Now you have to go find out. You have to do some investigation of what changes have been done in previous proteins from different viruses. And then once you have the protein, now you're trying to, dock thousands of molecules from drugs. And just about every drug company is doing that right now. Can we tackle that in some other way where we use AI to eliminate the ones that are going to be clear failures, for example? You don't have to eliminate everything. You don't have to do everything. It's not an either or, but you could say eliminate the known failures and then focus on the ones that have promise. And now you're going to go do molecular dynamics on hundreds of molecules as opposed to the thousands of molecules. And that time shortening process is the best we can do with AI at this point until we fix these issues where, can we harmonize the data? Can we have access to the data? Can we, cross borders with that data? Can we not cross borders? All of these things are still very much far out. But at least we can right now use on particular problems that are just things that we've done traditionally anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Fernanda. I agree. There's a couple of great AI questions coming in on Slido. I want to ask Vivian real quick though, and also Matthew. How do we get to that data standard? How do we get the community to start going towards what Fernanda just mentioned about being able to really utilize the data as a community? Let's start with Vivian.
How do we get the community to go to that standard? I think that's actually, I see a question that's come up about this too, which is, maybe I can switch it into answering the question that came in there so that we're actually doing what we've been asked. So the question is really, hey, it's great that we have all these formats and standards. We've been doing it for years and groups have made progress. COVID-19 is creating the opportunity for what will really compel researchers and enterprises and academia to participate rather than, what's the tipping point there? So I'll answer it in two parts. I think we have multiple different pieces around common data formats, exchanges, and standards. And I think we need to do more of that. And the examples I gave before about RDA and GA4GH are examples of that. I'll also answer another question that's here online about that immediately. This question around, there's a 6-week sprint. Are they doing it in an agile manner? Yes, they are. Instead of spending 2 years cogitating about that, which often takes the time, they're trying to do quick sprints every week across different projects that collaborate, so truly embodying an agile manner. So they are trying to do that. So I'll try to answer that question. Back to the other question around all the pieces. I think all the pieces are in place. The motivation is that we have to solve a problem using all of these things now, as opposed to it being a side thing that takes a long time to do. So I think if we can actually show some progress quickly, like examples I just gave for some of the standards, and their application and the value of that application to share the data, then that's going to be important. And what's going to be compelling is if we have multiple groups being able to share data by supporting those variety of exchanges and standards, going, wow, really, your data over here and my data over here, by using the same formats of exchange, we can quickly make some level of understanding. And I'll throw it back maybe to Susan, because I know NIH has been through some of these issues about what they should be doing there in that space. They're thinking more broadly across all of the institutes rather than just one. So I don't want to speak for the government here, but maybe there's a place there that the government can also support. Susan wants to put a comment in there as well. But I think it's all of us that have to come together around how we do that. And the tipping point is going to come by showing value, why that's really important. All we need is a couple of examples of this, and I think it's going to start that ball rolling. Back to you, Ari.
Susan, you want to front?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vivian, for passing me the ball. That's really wonderful. I talked yesterday with Stan about a concept on evolution, which is sort of a catalytic, dramatic change that happens all at once. And that's really what pushes evolution forward. And here we are in our catalytic change, all working at home and discussing data interoperability and data standards. And I want to give you 3 maybe use case examples of things that are or could be happening right now that really will push that catalytic change forward. And the first one is in the life sciences and the healthcare communities, which are coming together to codify consensus around, for example, the United States Core Data for Interoperability. This is a standardized set of healthcare-related data classes that constitute particular data elements for electronic healthcare records like birth weight, sex, blood pressure, for example. If we could agree on standardizing these sets of classes, mapping these classes to a few common data models, for example, like OMOP, via FHIR or other fast healthcare and travel resources, if you'd like to know, in order to create the largest healthcare focused data set in history. That would be a data set that would be very valuable for AI, for machine learning, for all types of different research. If we could do that as a very large organization, not just at NIH, but engaging our healthcare providers and our academic researchers to consider doing this, create those data standards, map them to a common data model, agree on those common data models, and then let's store those in platforms where we can interoperate and find and access those data sets. We would really be doing the community a great favor. The second use case is around the medical imaging societies and those communities. So those societies like RSNA, for example, are coming together to implement rapid and flexible imaging standards and associated ways to collect that data, and then agreeing on a platform to share that data. Communities and societies coming together to agree on standards and forming platforms, working with Google, working with AWS, working with NIH, that will really make a big difference. And I just want to put a second or third plug in for RSNA. Like Vivian, I have never seen a group come together working to define guidelines for data sharing that we can all adopt, best practices that rapidly push forward science. These are the catalytic evolutionary changes that we need right now to make a difference in data sharing. And thanks, Vivian, for passing me that ball.
Just a quick, before I go on mute, and then I'm going to go to Matthew. So quick follow-up, Susan. So it sounded like one of the original questions I asked was, what is the impression about how things were before the pandemic versus now? And I think you just made alluded to that a little bit. So was people coming together and trying to start work together, is that one of the biggest things you've seen?
Oh yeah, I would say that specifically at NIH, but also in the communities, we are really coming together as a one agency, working on data sharing, working on data platforms, creating data strategies, which we will give out to the community through RFPs, through funding announcements, through webinars. This will be happening very soon, just at NIH, but this is happening at NSF, and it's happening at DOE, and it's happening at VA, and we're all working together. It's an unprecedented amount of collaboration, and it's really been invigorating and exhausting.
Yes, I'm listening to you on all of that. You've got a lot going on. Awesome. So Matthew, I know you have a lot of perspective on this. What are your thoughts?
I have a lot of opinions on that. I don't know if I have a lot of perspective, but I think that one of the things that I'm continually struck by is still the gap between research and clinical. And we've been trying for years to close that, and I think all we've done is really sharpen the gradients between them. So, and there are reasons that they're different, but everything that we're trying to do right now relies on clinical data through some sort of ETL process, whether that's mapping to a well-known standard or mapping to an ad hoc standard. And that ETL process is under-resourced. So, and that's going to continue to be the case as long as the primary data collection systems in the clinical environment are mismatched to the research systems. So, that's not an easy problem to fix, but that's the problem. That's where everything comes together around getting the data sharing right, because the interests are so different, and that's where the regulations focus. All of the mappings that I see that are being done to common clinical data models are lossy from the clinical side, right? So there's not enough focus on that side of the equation, I think.
So follow-up question to you, Matthew, that actually is on Slido too. So how much of that steep gradient has been sharpened by data privacy and governance and security And then the follow-up to that is, what are the ethical, legal, social implications for research? They seem to be. Are they on the back burner and not addressed, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, they're certainly not being ignored. I mean, absolutely, they're not on the back burner. Although I will note that in this time of pandemic, the lines between public health research and public health activity do blur a little bit. Yeah, certainly issues of data privacy are kind of key in what's driving that. Here, although I had sort of argued against technical solutions, here I actually do think there's opportunity for technologies to come into play that that provide much stronger guarantees of privacy than our current approach is of the identification as reviewed by experts. I think that's an opportunity that remains to be explored. But I think there really is an organizational barrier. There aren't resources on the clinical informatics side that have this same charge at the sort of like global commons level. And until we can really start to build that capability out, we're going to continue to be rate limited there substantially.
I have a follow-up to that, Matthew. So, in the United States, it's easy for us to see what the barriers are because our healthcare system is so fragmented. But, even if you assume sort of a best case scenario from our point of view here in the United States, when we look to places like the UK where they have a national healthcare system, so you arrive there and then you realize it's a national healthcare system, but the data is not available nationally. So if there's a researcher that wants to actually do something with the data, these data sets are available regionally, and the regional points decide on what kinds of infrastructure and what kinds of software they actually use. And so, yes, the healthcare is nationalized, but the data is now regional, and each of these centers have seen different patients. And so they still have to overcome the barrier. So there is an opportunity here for technology. And I think if we keep waiting for, the sort of the best case scenario, assume everything is easily shareable and we could in some way, maintain privacy, we're still going to have issues with where's the data located physically, and can we harmonize from patient going to a Dr. A and then 6 months later to Dr. B, and that information not being exchanged. So there's still an opportunity for technology, and I think we just kind of have to, in a sense, not necessarily ignore, but find ways that we can work around a system that exists today, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me wonder. I'm just going to throw it out and hope that it's not a long answer, but have we overblown privacy a little bit? Because if you think globally and all the regulations that have come around that, and how much of the and then watching how much those policies have dropped to the floor right now to allow some collaboration going, and a lot of the restrictions sort of temporarily being relaxed on data privacy and such. What does that tell us? And anyone can answer. Do we spend too much time worrying about what might happen to our data versus what we can do?
Yeah, that's a pretty huge topic.
Yeah, I know.
So I would just offer, a high level opinion that we don't spend too much time worrying about it, but we're not actually thinking about it very constructively. I mean, in general, we don't know how to think about these problems very well. And so we tend to take an extreme position, either, all right, let's lean really heavily towards individual privacy where we can. We've already given it up in so many places in the US, in consumer data, in Patriot Act. Like, we've given up a lot of privacy already. But we tend to sort of gravitate to a real extreme. And I think that's just because we don't have good frameworks, good bioethical frameworks for thinking about how to do this. So yeah, it's a hard problem.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think I agree with you. We don't have good frameworks for this, and it's not the kind of conversation that we've had sufficient of to understand it with all the people that can provide influence. But it's also going to be a really tricky balance because you want to get stuff done. So as you were saying, Ari, it throws things on the cutting room floor and that tramples on things. And yet, in the absence of a framework, we have to get something done. So I think what we need to do is kind of fly the plane and build it at the same time. And it's the collection of folks that it takes to do that and recognizing that we're going to make mistakes. And I think science is about that, right? It's about realizing we take and test something, get it wrong, and improve it. And I just want to bring that up a little bit because what we've seen in the media or just in general, I'm just talking just in general, for the non-scientific population that don't understand how science is done, get different models and it becomes confusing. Why was that one right yesterday? It's wrong today. So helping the community understand issues that we're battling as scientists, so to help them understand our world, and also offer them the opportunity to have discussions around data itself. It's something that the community as a whole needs to have a better discussion around, maybe can inform us to have frameworks. So I think that's the long-term goal. How to do it short-term, that's complex because we've got to get stuff done and things will get lost. So I think we need to pay attention to how we actually do that at the same time.
Super interesting. Love asking provocative questions. You get great answers. Eli, I want to go to you for a second because you deal in multi-science, right? We're really focused on life sciences, biomedicine, coronavirus, and I know you all are very involved in that too. What's your perspective on this? And a question that showed up on Slido too. What could our field learn from how other science areas have handled their data?
So let's see. I think there are a couple of things I would say. One is that so we all know that humans are not good at reasoning about low probability, high cost outcomes, right? That's something I know. Me personally, I'm terrible at it. Okay, and it's actually kind of heartening to go and look at some of the psychology and go, oh yeah, so everybody's bad at this, so I don't have to feel so bad that I'm bad at this. But there's a big difference between if the impact for getting data sharing wrong is that somebody's pre-publication chemistry paper gets leaked, right? That's different from someone being able to re-identify me in a way that has personal consequences for me in my human relationships with the rest of society. Right. I think this goes back to the conversation we were just having, right? Where we need to figure out what that means. So in the physical sciences, we have the luxury of there not being as much negative human impact, and so most of the data is largely open to first order. And that allows us to do some pretty amazing things pretty fast. Now, what I would hope is that we can take the technologies out of the rest of the physical sciences, right, and apply a policy layer that allows us to make decisions about who gets to do what with what data, right, and still get all the scalability that we can get in the physical science. I mean, you look at what the LHC experiments do; it's crazy. I mean, they'll run at 60 gigs for hours and 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 hours, right? And they just run. That's what they do. And what I'd really like is to get that kind of tooling into the hands of the people who are trying to find a way out of the corona apocalypse, right? or cure cancer, right? So if you look at cancer, right? Cancer is also this giant sort of data mining type problem, right? And so a bunch of the high-level semantics for the kinds of things that you need to do on large data sets are actually similar. We just need to figure out a way to do that safely. And I think more work on data commons and especially safely doing data commons is going to be really key there. This idea that we can't do anything unsafe, we need to get away from that. Right, and we can't take this idea that we can't take any risks. That's not going to work anymore because we have work we have to do, and so we have to figure out how to do that work as safely as we can and structure that work in a way that if we make mistakes, the negative outcomes are small. Right, and then we can import a whole bunch of the tooling and advances from other science domains, and I think that'd be fantastic. Right, a bunch of what Fernando was talking about AI and ML, right? If we can actually get all the data labeled and structured in a way that it's consumed, that's great. There's a bunch of promise there, but we have to be. What we're not good at is structuring things in a way that allows us to do this safely. And when we make the mistakes, people don't get hurt.
Oh, interesting. I love that perspective. I mean, one of the things that I say a lot, and I've said to you a lot, is that life sciences, biomedicine, on a data maturity, data generation curve, is between 10 and 20 years behind the physical sciences, I think, because they started generating lots of data early. Astronomy needed to coordinate data as the Earth was turning. To have consistent observation of celestial phenomena, et cetera. So they had to standardize way long time ago. So we are to figure that out in life sciences, which is far more complex in a lot of ways, and complex in that it deals with mushy human stuff. That's an interesting thing. Chris, do you have anything to input on this?
No, actually, no. I just want to defer. Like I said, I'm the least accomplished person on the panel, so I'm just going to defer to the experts. That's my prerogative now. After 10 years, I get to gracefully bow out.
So let's we only have 5 minutes left here. There's as expected. I could talk to all of you all day long, so I love this. And hopefully everyone else is happy too. We still have 135 people on after an hour and 25 minutes, which is really amazing. Thank you all for staying. So we could go sort of into the machine learning accelerated direction, or we could talk a little bit more community level. So I'm going to ask 2 questions and leave it up to you to answer, whichever one you want. The machine learning side of things. The question is, how has it accelerated or complicated life sciences, and how has COVID-19 changed that, if at all? In fact, let's just ask that really quickly. Fernando, you're probably the best person to start that.
I was just answering one of the folks attending, and I missed a question, so that's very embarrassing.
So I asked, how is machine learning accelerated or complicated the situation in life sciences, and how recently has COVID-19 changed that, if at all?
Yeah, so I think right now we're still in the very early stages of what machine learning can do. It's in the stage of we have tried and true methods, and machine learning is trying to come up with new, either faster answers or elucidate in some other way that current methods can't. So still very much in that research stage. In the sense of, can machine learning come up with some answers? I think we've seen some examples recently. There's a couple of frameworks that I wanted to highlight. For example, Anyone is a framework that's been created by a researcher named Alexander Asayev. He's at Carnegie Mellon, and this is doing DFT calculations, which are very, very expensive computationally, and pushing those through basically an AI model. Another one was one we highlighted a few weeks back called Chemprop out of Broad, and they came up with a new antibiotic because of this framework that was not in the family of antibiotics, that was not expected. It was basically a failed diabetic drug. So to use AI frameworks like these give us promise, but again, do we have the data? Do we have some outcomes? Do we have it labeled? And do we have enough of it? And that's still always the question, is where can we find it? Is it labeled? Is it good? Is it biased? Is it not biased? So we're still very much in the research stage in that. But there's, it's shown promise.
Awesome, thanks. So I'm going to ask one last question, and folks can answer it quickly because there's a chance we might get cut off right at 12:30 Eastern here, and we have 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes. I've seen a lot of really interesting information about data equity, and also diversity and equity and inclusion. Things that have come to light or surfaced or changed as a result of coronavirus. Personally, I'm seeing a lot more diversity in voices coming in, and data being generated, and people being listened to as a part of this crisis. And I need to stop talking so you can answer. And I've also seen that we might have bias in data that's leading us to improper conclusions. Who wants to grab that last thing? I think we got like 45 seconds. Hopefully we don't get cut off. If we get cut off, thanks.
I'll have a shot at that, Ari, a little bit. So I think one thing that's really important, and I think most people know that, is that we've got some disparities of health that we have to deal with. And I think it appears that there's a disproportionate effect to our African American, Hispanic populations and colleagues and communities. And we need to understand that we have to responsibly collaborate with these populations. They have a long history of not having the best connections with science. I've seen lots of examples in the past. So the first one is a cultural one. We need to obtain good quality, accurate data for these populations if we're going to be able to help them. But I think they need to also be working responsibly with us and vice versa to be able to understand, how do we work with those communities to gather that data? And what are we giving back to those communities to ensure that they're actually reaching those communities? There's going to be inequities in the way we do things as well here. We have to be careful of. When we develop vaccines, which populations are they going to be affecting, and how do they affect them effectively? Are they disproportionately affecting Caucasians as opposed to African Americans? So how do we look at the equity of treatment, the equity of testing, and the equity of accurately getting that data and sharing it responsibly? I think those are the things that I think really concern me, and I think we need to engage with those communities and our colleagues to be able to ensure that we do that in a responsible manner.
Excellent. All right, so we are 1 minute over. For that, I love finishing on that particular note. Thank you to all you, the panelists. Very grateful for you all spending time with us today. I think this was a nice discussion. And thank you to all the attendees. Big thank you to Vast Data. Really appreciate your sponsorship, and thank you to CHI and Bio-IT World for putting this on. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week, and stay safe and healthy.